Hey mechatronics students, this is Andrew Dowland, and in this video we're going to be talking about the vertical mill, and we're going to be adjusting the angle of the head. So this is not something that's done very frequently, but there are occasional jobs where you may want to get a bevel on something, get something locked in at a precise angle, and you do need to adjust the angle of the head of the mill. So if you ever do this, for whatever reason, make sure when you're finished with whatever project you're working on, you go ahead and put that head back where it's supposed to be. This is another frustrating thing that's just common courtesy, is not to have the angle of the head of the mill adjusted. And if you have adjusted it, put it back where you left it or where you found it, and make sure that it's dialed in. And we'll talk about that procedure as well. So first things first, we go to the side view of the mill, and you're going to see a protractor over here that allows us to adjust the angle. And I've loosened up these screws before. So there are 6 screws total that are holding this angle in place. 3 of them on this side, 1, 2, 3, and there's 3 exactly symmetrical on the opposite side. So the angle is adjusted by turning a worm gear in the back of the mill. So go ahead, it's the same size wrench. I am turning on that, and you can see the mill head is turning its angle up and down. So let's say that the project called for a 10-degree angle. We can use our protractor over here to get it dialed into a 10 degrees. All right, so the protractor looks like it's pretty well lined up with that red tick, and there's our 10 degrees. Now, before we turn the mill on and do any work, we're going to make sure that we lock it in place with all 6 screws and get them very rigid, very tight. So go ahead and really pull on those so that they are locked into position and that the head is rigidly affixed to the base of the mill once these are all locked in. So I'm doing the same thing on the back side, locking all 3 of those screws bolts into place. Okay, so now the mill head is at 10 degrees, ready to do whatever job we want to do with it. That's all well and good. So let's take a look at the front side of the mill and how we can adjust a different angle. All right, so now we're looking at the front side of the mill, and this whole thing is allowed to pivot in this direction as well. There are 4 bolts that hold it secure in that direction, and they're located right here. So we can adjust those 4 bolts if we want to change that angle, and they're going to be probably pretty darn snug as well. All right. I can go ahead and remove the handle to access these bolts a little bit easier. All right, and then with this head, we can also use a little worm gear that's going to allow you to tilt it. And that worm gear drive is located right here. So this bolt allows us to rotate the head of the mill in a different direction. And you see a little protractor over there that's indicating where this is at. So again, if I wanted this perhaps set at 20 degrees for whatever reason, get it locked in, and we go ahead and tighten up these screws before we use the mill in this different angled position. All right. So we've got like a combination angle that's cooking here. All right, so now the mill has been adjusted, the angle for whatever work we need to do. We complete that job, and then when we're done, an important step here is not to leave the mill in this strange angular position. We want to get it back to 0 using the protractors, and then it's important that we dial in the mill so that we know that the head is square relative to the bed of the mill. So let's demonstrate that. So the first thing we're going to do is to put the head back where it was. We loosen up all 4 screws that hold this angle in place. Getting a little bit of a workout here. And then we're going to bring that head back to its 0 position, get the protractor lined up at 0 degrees of rotation, or pretty close to it, and then we'll tweak that in a little bit here. Okay, so looking at the marks here, I think I might have had my head right in the camera shot there, but I'm lined up pretty close with 0, and I'm just going to snug these bolts into place, not going to tighten them up for the final alignment until a little bit later. So we'll get all 4 of these guys tightened. And then same thing to adjust the angle, the other angle of the head. We're going to loosen up all those bolts. Okay, so all the 6 bolts are loose that hold that into place. And we're going to bring that angle up. I went the wrong direction for a second there. And use the protractors to get it about where it should be. All right, and again, you never want to leave the angle, if you've brought it out of square, make sure you put it back for the next person, because again, 90% of the jobs that you're going to do are going to involve the head being perfectly square with the bed. Okay, so we're going to jump over here and check my angle. This guy's almost to the protractor 0 degrees. We're going to bring it back up a little bit. Okay, so the protractors are both reading 0, 0. Pretty happy with that. But the head could still be a little bit off. So we need to do what's called dialing in the head. So let's talk about how we would dial in the head of the mill. It involves, like the vise, a dial caliper, a dial indicator to help us out. So I've got the chuck installed in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and clamp down on the dial indicator. All right. And then I'm going to use the bed of the mill for this particular example. So get a nice spot here. And what we're going to do is use the dial indicator to come down on this bed. And we want to make sure that the bed is free of any dust and grease and chips and stuff like that. And as we rotate this, we'll probably do that manually. So we'll put it into high speed so that this is easier for us to turn. Okay, we can manually rotate the entire assembly over here. And I do have to position a little bit further down so you guys can see what I'm talking about down here. Okay, so there's the dial indicator, and with its little tip down there that we can adjust. So what we're going to do is manually rotate the mill around, and what we want to see is that as we rotate it, if this is out of alignment angularly, you'll see it on the dial indicator in both directions. So the first thing we're going to worry about is from this front to back, or I guess left to right as I'm viewing the mill. I want to see that dial indicator reading about the same, and that's going to tell me that this angle is adjusted correctly in this direction. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and drop this down and raise things up a little bit. Get us a nice point over here. Okay, so now I'm going to raise up the mill until I see that dial indicator start to move, and I'm going to zero it out. So I'm raising the bed, or the raising the bed of the mill, and I've got it dialed in right at 0. So let's zoom in on the dial indicator so you guys can appreciate that a little bit better. All right, so the dial indicator is reading 0. Now as I rotate this around, ignore the gap in the bed there. I'm going to come all the way around and see. Oh yeah, it's rotated a couple of turns here, so it's pretty severely out of alignment. So what we're going to do is we have the bolts to the head just slightly loosened, and we're going to begin to dial in the head so that it's reading pretty much 0, 0. So the 4 bolts that are responsible for holding the head into place. I'm going to zoom out. All right, adjust my angle up here. Okay, so these 4 bolts, I'm going to tackle this adjustment side to side first. So I can see it's out of alignment pretty badly, so we're going to make sure that all of these are just, they're snug, but they're not tight whatsoever. So all 4 of these bolts have been loosened up, and then we're going to adjust our angle by tweaking this in with the worm gear over here. And what we're looking to see is a 0, 0. So I'm going to again adjust this down so that the dial indicator has just at the 0 mark. There we go. Then as I rotate it around, all right, it is. So I'm looking at a point here and a point here, and I want to get them dialed in to one another. And it looks like it's pretty severely out of whack there. So again, we just kind of tweak this until we get 0, 0 across there. And I'm going to bring the dial down, or the head down. Okay, this is kind of a back and forth deal where we just kind of try it. There's the 0 mark. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the spindle around. And it's not even touching over here. So it was touching on this side, but not touching on this side, which means I need to take that head and rotate it in this direction a little bit so that that starts to engage. Okay, so it's now reading 0 at that point. And we're going to go ahead and rotate it around, and I want to see it reading back to 0 over here. All right, so we keep getting closer and closer, and we'll just get it so that it's at 0, 0. Then you know you've got it dialed in that direction. And then we do the same thing for the other directions. I'm going to pause it for a little bit and get a different setup. Okay, I didn't like the setup that I had prior. I've switched out the dial indicator for a different sort, and in this case we can see this has got a little plunger down here. It's going to make my job a little bit easier to see what's happening. And so what I'm going to do is to put it on top of the vise, and we'll dial this in so that it's at 0 point over here. So now this is a little bit easier for me to see, and what I'm aiming to look at here is how is that head doing all the way around. If this is perfectly set up, if the head is perfectly square to the vise, to this bed plate, then we should see very little movement of the dial indicator as we rotate in a circle. So we can adjust it side to side with one adjustment of the head, and then front to back with a different adjustment of the head. So right now, as I'm dialing this in, I've got 1 point over there that's reading about 5 thousandths. And then if I go to a line that's pretty much the opposite, it's at 0. So I'm going to try to split the difference between the two by adjusting that head and getting it dialed in. So that's the wrong direction for me to go. And I'm just going to tweak this. So right now it's about 1 thousandths over here. And as I rotate to the other direction, that got me about 5 thousandths. So I just kind of keep going back and forth, splitting the difference until I get this lined up. All right, so there's about 5 thousandths when it's over here, and then I rotate it, and that's pretty close to about 5 thousandths on that end. So I've kind of got the rotation aligned this way of the angle of the head. Now I'm going to go front to back and align it the other direction. So to do that, I'm going to move the other screws. And let's see how we do this. First of all, take kind of a measurement and see when it's in this position, I'm at 15 thousandths. And when I rotate all the way back, it's at about it's about negative 10 thousandths. So I'm going to kick this out at 0 now and 20. Try to split the difference. Maybe I get it to 15 and 15. All right, looks like I need to go back this way a little bit. 0. Oh, that was the wrong direction. So there's about 0. And then when I go back here, I'm just kind of adjusting that back and forth until I find the 0, 0 mark that I'm looking for. So there we're at 80. Come back here. Now it's at 0. So it's about 20 thousandths different front to back. That's at 90. That's at 85. I'm having a fun time getting this one dialed in. That's not bad. Now I'm getting really, really close. I'm going to move the z-axis up until I hit the 0. And let's just see how that dial's doing as I rotate. There we go. Now it's getting really close to where I'd like to see it. Again, put it at 0. Oops. So it's at 0 in the front. It's at pretty darn close to 0 in the back. There we go. So now I've got this rotating all the way around, and I can see my numbers are only going off by about 2 or 3 thousandths of an inch as it rotates. So I am getting pretty darn close to where I'd like to see it in place to get that dialed in. And we go ahead and start tightening up the bolts a little bit, get them a little bit snugger on the outside of the machine. That adjusts the angle. And then we recheck things after we've got it kind of tightened up. All right, so we're going to give it another rotate here. Again, for most of the jobs we're doing, if we hit within 5 thousandths here, we'd be doing pretty darn good. So as I rotate this around, I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, we could spend more time to get it exactly at 0, but it looks like it's only about 2 or 3 thousandths off of square in this case. So that's kind of a long process here of dialing in the head. Now, once you've got everything where the dial indicator is pretty much reading zeros or only a few thousandths variation, we go ahead and we tighten up all the bolts. And again, just kind of get them, you don't want to tighten them all up at the same time, just get them a little bit snugger and a little bit snugger, work your way around, get all of the bolts tightened. All right, then I'm going to give this another spin here. Oh yeah, that's looking really good. I'm only seeing it, it's actually about 3 thousandths as it rotates around there. So that's how you go about, if you adjust the angle of that vertical mill's head, it's important that you dial it back in. It's not enough to put your protractors at 0. It can still be off quite a bit. And so it's important that after you've got it adjusted, you put the dial indicator on either the flat surface of the bed, or I liked using the top surface of this vise, rotate it around, and you want to see that that dial indicator is not moving more than about 2 or 3 thousandths of an inch. 5 is okay, but get it dialed in so that you know that the head is about as perfectly square to the bed as it can be, and leave it that way. Lock it in place, and your fellow machinists that are working with you will be happy. So do not leave the head all out of whack and then forget to dial it in. Such an important thing, because again, 90% of your setup is going to be with the head at 90 degrees, with the vise perfectly dialed in at 90 degrees. That's where most of the jobs are getting done on this machine. If you adjust the head, dial it back in, be a good neighbor, and we'll catch you guys next time.